the Greens health spokesman and former drug and alcohol clinician, Dr. Richard Di, told Breakfast that a law and order approach to synthetic drugs would lead to a pharmacological arms race, where such bans will always be one step behind what's being cooked up in drug labs overseas.
They can have a new chemical on the shelf within days, and the concern is if you ban one drug and introduce a completely new novel drug with unknown toxicity, you may in fact be exposing people to a much more harmful drug. And that's the real danger here, is that we may be driving the market towards the production of new drugs of unknown toxicity, potentially more harmful.
Senator Richard Di, the Greens health spokesman, speaking on Breakfast last week. Well, the Assistant Treasurer David Bradbury announced this ban under Australia's consumer law yesterday, and he joins us now. Minister, welcome to Breakfast.
Good morning, Fran.
Do you agree with Richard Di there? He says that outlawing these drugs could encourage manufacturers just to switch the chemical composition a bit and circumvent the ban, and we could end up with things that are potentially more harmful with unknown toxicity.
Well, that sounds like a case of arguing that we wave the white flag and give up any efforts to try and make sure that we regulate an area where these drugs are clearly dangerous. They're drugs that can kill and will kill if we don't take action to protect the community against them. Now,
I think Senator Di point was that a law and order approach to something like this doesn't work, and we need a more holistic and a smart approach to this.
Well, look, I think that sounds to me like a backdoor approach to decriminalise drugs that are already out there, deemed to be illicit, deemed to be illegal, drugs that we know do harm. Now, if that's a debate that people want to have, they're entitled to have that debate. But what we are facing are changes in the way in which these drugs that are dangerous can be put together. The chemical compounds are changing. It is important that whilst we continue to take the view, and I think this continues to be a pretty strong majority view in the community, that we should be protecting the community from these drugs, then it is our obligation to make sure that the laws keep up to speed with changes to the chemical compounds of these drugs.
But how do the laws do that? I mean, there are thousands of these synthetic drugs available on the internet and elsewhere. How does banning 19 of them do that?
Well, that's a good point, and it's a point that I've made very clearly, that we don't see a national product safety ban as being the most effective, or in fact the only way that we should be tackling this problem. This is very much an interim safeguard measure that we've put in place to try and make sure that 19 identified drugs, where there are some cracks in state and territory laws, to ensure that these drugs can be quickly taken off the shelves. But how do we tackle the problem more generally? Well, one of the things that we do is at the national level, through the Therapeutic Goods Administration, we list items on the poison standard. And we are calling on all of the states, and all of the states have effectively done this except for New South Wales and the Northern Territory. We're calling upon them all to ensure that there is automatic adoption of those prohibited drugs that are listed in the poison standard into their own criminal laws within each state, because drugs are generally combated at that level. But can I also make the point that at the national level, my ministerial colleague Jason Clare, who has responsibility for customs, has also announced that we will be reversing the onus of proof in relation to these matters, so that anyone bringing drugs into the country will have to demonstrate that they are safe, and that will put the onus on those that are importing those drugs into the country, and that does occur in a legal fashion until such time as these drugs are prohibited. And he has also indicated that he wants to work very closely with state and territory colleagues to make sure that we can introduce that reverse onus, not just in relation to the importation of these drugs, but in relation to their supply and their distribution and advertising more generally across states and territories.
If we look at the drug, the tragic case of Henry Kwan, Fiona Patton, who's the CEO of the Eris Foundation, which has been speaking out on this, says the drug compound that resulted in Henry Kwan's death is called NBOME. She said it's not on the New South Wales ban list, that particular compound, and it wouldn't be caught through your poison standard either.
Well, that's not my advice, Fran. That's not my advice. My advice is that it is caught under the criminal code and also the poison standard. Now, to the extent that there is evidence of drugs that are of a dangerous nature, such as these, that are not currently the subject of effective regulation, then we will act immediately to ensure that that's the case. But I make the point that my advice is that that is the case, that it is currently covered, and indeed we've been following closely at arm's length, obviously, but there have been enforcement activities and investigations going on in New South Wales in relation to individuals that may have been involved in the supply of those goods.
You're listening to RM Breakfast. It's 11 minutes to 8. Our guest is David Bradbury, Assistant Treasurer and Minister assisting for deregulation, the one who announced the ban of these synthetic drugs over the weekend. David Bradbury, you're also the member for Lindsay in Western Sydney, and you hold that seat by 1.1%. You support Julia Gillard to continue as Prime Minister until the election. Why would you, given your margin and given today's Nielsen poll shows Labor is headed for a massive defeat with a primary vote now below 30%?
Look, Fran, I've run in some tough elections over the years. I've run for the seat of Lindsay. This will be my 5th time that I've run for the seat. I lost on 2 occasions, won on 2 occasions. There were elections that I lost that people told me I was going to win. There were elections that I won that people told me I was going to lose. And just to underline that point, the night before the last election, I think my odds on Sporting Bet were something like about $4 or $5 to 1. Now, they're marginally higher than that at the moment. But look, the reality is that a week is a long time in politics. There's no sugarcoating the fact that we are facing some very big challenges in terms of the community's response to the performance of our government. But I think we have been a very, very strong and effective government. We've achieved a lot, and we have to continue to prosecute the case.
But you've been prosecuting the case for 3 years now, almost exactly 3 years, and the voters, according to all the polls, not just Nielsen today, are not backing you, and that hasn't changed for a long time now. What's changed is on the weekend that Nielsen, Galaxy poll on the weekend and Nielsen today do show that if Julia Gillard was replaced by Kevin Rudd, then the two-party preferred vote would change to 50-50. Labor will go from a massive loss to even chance. Do you believe those polls? And if so, how can caucus ignore that basic arithmetic?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on individual polls. Obviously, there have
What
been
about
trends.
a trend?
There have been trends in these polls as well. But Malcolm Turnbull, I understand, was twice as popular as Tony Abbott in the same poll. So, look, I think to some extent there is a bit of a grass is greener on the other side effect in these polls. I think the very rugged nature of the political debate in this minority government has been such that it's taken a fair bit of sheen off both leaders. But I'd make the point that when it comes to leadership, Julia Gillard has achieved things as Prime Minister of this country that I think will stand up the test of time, things that have made a profound impact on our country. I just want to share one example with you, Fran. There are lots of people out there talking about the anatomy of the Prime Minister. I make this point. I reckon she's got more leadership capabilities in a small finger than the collective bodies of those critics of hers that are out there. I've seen her deliver things. Pricing carbon. When other Prime Ministers tried to do it, couldn't do it. She's done it. I saw her when it came to the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And I make this point, that as someone that sat on the Expenditure Review Committee and understood just how difficult it was to make the savings necessary to make this scheme happen, there were plenty of occasions where, I felt that this was so hard, it was so difficult to do. But I tell you what, it was the leadership of the Prime Minister that made it happen. Now, I think there has been an effort to diminish the great achievements of this Prime Minister and our government, whilst people seem so intent to focus and to obsess upon and to crucify her and us for every mistake. No one's perfect, but I tell you what, the legislative achievements that we have delivered in government will stand the test of time. Whether that's reflected in the views of the respondents of the latest Nielsen poll or not is another thing. But of course, we will continue to try and make sure at every opportunity that we make the Australian public aware of the achievements that we've delivered in office, achievements that will make our country a better place.
David Bradbury, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Fran.
David Bradbury is the Assistant Treasurer. It's 6 minutes to 8.
RN, your world unfolding.